Hello, it's me, Ronald Young Jr. And you probably already know we're in the middle of our Patreon campaign. And I wanted to give you a bit of an update. Since we started our campaign in December, we've added 12 patrons, which increased our monthly contributions by over $100. I appreciate your help so very much. We're getting closer and closer to becoming a self-sustaining show because you've decided to join in with us. Now, we only have a few weeks left in the campaign, and I would love to see us get 18 more patrons. That would give us 30 for this campaign, which is just a nice round number to be proud of. So, if you enjoy the show and want it to continue consistently, please consider joining the Patreon. It helps to pay for studio time and distribution fees, as well as booking event space for our live shows coming up later this year. And speaking of live shows, when you join the Patreon, you get access to a code that gives you 50% off tickets. So you definitely want to take advantage of that. Most of all, know that contributing to the Patreon is something you can feel good about because you're directly financing the existence of the show. So, if you're ready to help, go to the show notes and click the link or go to patreon.com/leavingthetheater right now. That's patreon.com/leavingthetheater, or again, go to the link in our show notes. Thank you to everyone who's joined already, and we look forward to adding new patrons. All right, let's start the show. You probably know this relatively familiar story. A man who calls himself the Messiah walks among the common folks, healing the sick and raising the dead. His message puts him in direct conflict with the authorities of his time, yet his following continues to grow as he's preaching a message of hope and light to people who really need to hear it. Unfortunately, his story didn't quite make the Bible. You can only find it written in the Book of Clarence. I'm Ronald Young Jr., and I'm leaving the theater. All right, this is Ronald, and I am leaving the theater after seeing The Book of Clarence. The Book of Clarence, written and directed by Jeymes Samuel, starring LaKeith Stanfield, Omar Sy, Anna Diop, RJ Cyler, Michael Ward, Alfre Woodard, Teyana Taylor, and Caleb McLaughlin. And as usual, for a complete cast listing, you can go to the link in our show notes. I'm not here alone. I'm here with one of my favorite Leaving the Theater guests. I'm here with
Jonquilyn Hill. Hello.
Jonquilyn Hill, my fellow preacher's kid. Are you a preacher's kid?
Am I a PK? And also my father was a PK and his father was a PK.
Yeah.
It's what we do. It's what we do.
A fellow PK out here in the world, living our lives, watching semi-sacrilegious movies, like borderline blasphemous movies.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I mentioned this to you going in. I thought it was going to be similar to that Adult Swim show, Black Jesus, which is like a little off the wall, but like at the end of the day, the messaging is like, the messaging is consistent. And this was kind of that. It had a lot happening in it. There was a lot going on.
So just to give everyone a sense of the movie, if you've seen the preview, you've seen LaKeith Stanfield, and he's in some sort of predicament in the preview, and he realizes that he has to raise some money, and he decides to raise some money by either becoming the 13th apostle or by becoming a Messiah in and of itself. It involves some schemes, and that is the premise of the movie. Let's just, right off the bat, just straight off the top, what did you think of the movie?
Okay, I was thinking, as I was watching the movie, I was thinking of how I would word this. I would say it is a backdrop to do a bunch of stuff. Like, yes, there's a plot. But it's more like just like an excuse to do some things. Like there were very cool shots, like very cool effects. I know that cast was expensive. The cinematography was beautiful. Like the way it was done, I was like, oh, there's money behind this. But there were times it felt like a little disjointed. That being said, like lots of interesting camera shots, lots of like, oh, okay, like this is an interesting thing to visually look at.
I think you nailed it when you said it is an interesting backdrop to do a lot of different things, because I would say that, but I would say it's totally unbalanced. That's how I would say that. Like, because I feel like they are doing a lot of things. And as we were walking out of theater, I heard other folks also saying it was kind of all over the place. And I think that was my biggest issue with it, was that it starts being one type of movie, a movie where Clarence is into hijinks and he's in a chariot race, and they're doing this very much Flintstones-esque view of the modern Stone Age kind of, where they're looking at the Roman Empire and just using all these words to just basically compare it to us. Clarence sells weed, and they have a different name for it. Clarence's love interest works at a beauty shop, but it's like a different looking type of beauty shop. It's just all of these things about them being oppressed by the cops who are Romans. You know what I mean? Which is all cool, but like when you get to the main plot, if they would have stayed there maybe and not got so much into the actual story of Jesus, I think they would have been safer. And not because I think they did anything sacrilegious in that part, but just because it was not a good story, I think.
Yeah, it was a little confusing. Like there was a moment towards the end with Thomas where I was like, damn, double the homicide. Because Thomas is going to have to go through this twice. We know the story. Yeah. Like, it's set up like his brother and then, like, Jesus. He's going to have to go through this twice. That's terrible.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it was just like, there was a moment when they were floating, and that was when I was like, okay, I think that has readjusted what kind of movie this is. Yeah. Like, it's very surreal. Yeah. And I wish they would have done something to establish that earlier on, because I wasn't sure what amount of, I'm not going to sit there and be like, this is a believable story, but the amount of believability, like, should I be going in here with like, you know, random acts of flyness, but I'm a Virgo expectations? Yes. Or should I go in here with like Black Jesus expectations? Like what are...
Or even Atlanta expectations.
And it was a little all over the place. I was trying to figure out the vibe. Initially when the movie started, I was thinking like, oh, this is Friday set in biblical times.
I thought the same thing. I said, this is Friday. Yes.
Yeah. And I love, like, I kid you not.
Yeah.
Friday, one of my favorite movies.
Friday is my father's favorite movie, and I only recently realized that.
It's amazing.
My father is a pastor.
I used to watch Friday with my parents every summer. Like, we would just sit down and be like, ooh, Friday's on, and, like, the quotes, all the things. Like, that was our jam. So I was sitting down, and I was like, ooh, a biblical Friday. Like, okay. And then there were times it wasn't, times it was. Yeah, it was all over the place. That's a good way to phrase it.
I think one of the things that, like, we and you turn to each other at the very end of this movie. Also, it's always my favorite moment when me and you have the same feeling at the same time. Yeah. It always makes me feel like, yes, we're in there. But like, there's a moment where someone is being crucified, and at a moment out of nowhere, way out of left field, all of a sudden the camera flashes to some Pharisees. And also I should note that everyone in all of the Jews in the movie, all of the Israelites in the movie, everyone that would be under the Roman Empire at this time, they're all black. Everybody in there is black, which I think is an interesting choice, and I liked it.
Yeah.
But at one point during this crucifixion, all of a sudden it flashes to the Pharisees, who are also black. And I remember looking at them, and I looked at you, I was like, where do you think it's been?
Yeah, because it was just like, I ain't got to get into Bible study with y'all, but like, of course, like any society, there are multiple things at play. So like, you have the Roman Empire, and then you also have like this intra-community stuff. And that was some intra-community stuff that just popped up out of nowhere. And I was like, where were they the whole time? And then I was like, I was thinking this, I was like, maybe the point is that they weren't there the whole time, but if that's the case, like, at least mention them.
Yeah.
Like, because I could totally see it as like, oh, those are the bourgeoisie, like, those are like the uppity Negroes, like, whatever, but it wasn't established at all. And the costumes looked really cool.
Yeah. The only reason why me and you knew who they were was because I think of our church background and our like watching epic movies background. That's the only reason why.
Yeah, like if I were going in with like no religious background at all, I would have been like, who they?
Yeah. And I thought that. I guess it almost made me wonder if they had a bigger part in the movie that was cut.
Yeah.
And I mean, at some point, I imagine the studio would be like, you have too many bad guys. Like at some point, you know, there's this wonderful Benedict Cumberbatch joke that is in there that kind of like plays itself out towards the end. And then I don't understand what it was there for. I don't understand why he was there or the...
Okay, that was the confusing part too, because I'm like, they don't look alike. But like, because I'm like, does no one know what this person looks like?
Yeah.
Does no one... But then we do, because I was thinking we was never going to get a face reveal. And maybe, I think the way I would have done it, I would have done the face reveal at the very, very end.
Yeah.
But we got a face reveal, like, maybe even midway through the movie that I was not expecting.
Yeah.
That being said, there were some cool shots, like a really cool play on the Last Supper.
Yeah. I liked that.
Yeah. The
cinematography was great.
It was
and the
gorgeous.
music was great. And I expect that from Jeymes Samuel because his background is in music. You know what I mean? So like I expected those things and the artsiness of the movie that was there, but it was just it like in terms of story, it falls flat. It's like one of the times you don't know Nicole Hill, but she's a frequent guest on the show. I could imagine she'd be like going mad looking at some of the story things that they chose here because like other than that there's like a good movie to look at here, but the other thing is like the harbinger of death for a movie. Something that always gives me clarity is if I see a movie released in January that looks like this, then I know it's going to be missing something, and this is missing something because otherwise it'd be out in December.
Yeah, that's the thing about the January movie thing. Because it's like, these are the movies that were supposed to be Oscar bait, but didn't quite make it.
Yeah,
like,
they didn't take all the studio notes.
Yeah, it's like, okay, this was supposed to be like, it was supposed to be a counterpart to American Fiction.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be like all of these things. And like, beautiful film. I really can't wait to see what he does next. Like some of the shots and just the editing.
Yeah.
The editing was very cool. Like the use of the camera. Like, oh my gosh. Like, I'm just like, okay, I want to see more. But like, also like, let's get some more iterations of that script going. Let's get some more. And there were a lot of bad guys. There were a lot of bad guys.
Yeah,
Like
it was like you said, the cast being that expensive and you having that many like antagonists, just it doesn't seem like the move. And I think most of all for me, towards the end of the movie, there's this wrestling with faith and belief. I mean, or faith and knowledge, belief versus knowledge, I should say. And I don't think that they landed the plane well on that because at some point there is a miracle, a bona fide miracle that happens in this movie and it is completely unexplained. The person that probably made it happen wasn't even seen in the scene, and there's no connection between these two individuals throughout the entire movie except for one time at the end when a person is doing something to another person. You know what I mean?
And like, I noticed that there were a lot of talk. A lot of the characters surrounding one of the characters were in conversation with one of the characters. And part of me was like, I know why this person isn't around because y'all are not acting the way you're supposed to be. Like, y'all are being terrible to these people.
Yeah.
And like, he would hit you up if he heard you talking to this man like this.
Yes.
Like, why are you talking to him crazy?
Yeah.
Like, this, he would have been like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, why you... Wait, you did what?
Yeah.
Like, it was just, that was a little bit of like, I don't know. It was people being very high and mighty.
Yeah.
But like the people you would not expect to be high and mighty, which like, I don't know. Some of the actions I saw from the 12 disciples were actions I would have expected from the Pharisees.
And I think that's the problem. If you had the Pharisees available to be in the movie, then why not just put them in the movie? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if you're going to have the disciples doing their job, then at that point, it's like, well, then why do we even need to know that the Pharisees are available? Because you already have some built-in naysayers that are going to like disparage whatever the thing is that's happening anyway. The other part is like a part of these parts of this movie make other parts moot. Like the freeing of the slaves in this, which is one part of the movie, it just feels like that goes completely unneeded.
Where did they go? They wasn't going to ride for their man?
That's exactly my my point. I thought they were going to show up at one point, and that we didn't even see them again was wild.
Yeah, I would have been like, all right, like it's almost. I almost sort of imagined it like in that scene in They Clone Tyrone, where it's like, all right, I got the hood with me.
Yeah.
Like I really expected him to have like Jerusalem on his back, and they were not on his back.
No. And I think the last thing I'll say is this movie suffers from the fact that the movie begins with Jeymes Samuel giving us a little bit of speech to contextualize the movie. And in it, he says a couple things. He says, I made this movie as an homage to the epic films of old Hollywood. Ben-Hur, I think it's called, what is the Easter story one called?
It was Ben-Hur. Not Passion of the Christ. That's not an old one. Although it did get passion-y.
Yeah. I did not like that.
No, yeah. It was like, and I understand that was violent, but I was just like, oh, this, okay.
But that's not what you established the movie for. It's like it becoming a horror film out of nowhere.
Yeah, it was like, I don't know. I just wanted to, I wish I would have known. It took me up and down a lot, and I just need to, my thing is like, I'll go on the ride with you, but set the parameters for me so I know, like, when I need to keep my hands and feet inside the car.
Yeah, agreed.
But yeah, I can't remember the name of that movie.
Yeah, so he talks about the epic films. Then he says, I wanted to make this movie so we could see what the other people were doing during the Jesus story. Like, what was the person who made Jesus sandals doing? What were the people that, like, lived in there that were doing stuff, making the chariots, whatever? And then he says, this is one of those stories. So I hope y'all enjoy the Book of Clarence. This is not one of those stories.
No, and, like, I think
where was the person that made Jesus a sandal? Sorry, I don't want to be that specific, but like, it's not one of those stories.
No, I would have been like, oh, there just was not enough. But I think part of it is like, okay, it is this idea that like around this time, a bunch of people were like, yeah, I'm the Messiah. Like scammers have been scamming ever since the beginning of time, and like scammers compel us so many things, and so it's like, yeah, show us the scammers. And there were like several, because like. Yes, there were crucifixions, but those were not the only ones. Like, it treated it like jail or, like, even, like, the death penalty, except it was even more common. And I think just sort of showing, like, okay, there are all these different stories. I think even some examples of, like, have a bunch of different people calling themselves the Messiah. Just, like, a montage of people being like, yeah, it's me, yeah, it's me, yeah, it's me. And maybe Clarence is like, oh, I'm going to get like that guy. And be like, oh, yeah, that Jesus guy is doing the best job. Like, I need to get like him if I'm going to be out here. Like, I don't know. Call me up and I'll help out with some scripting.
Okay, so with all of that being said, you know what we do here at Leaving the Theater. It's out of 5 stars. What do you give it out of 5 stars?
I'm going to give it 2.5. It looked gorgeous. Like, if you are streaming, and you just want to see something cool, if you're in the mood for, like, something just a little bit like, I don't know, quirky, off the rails, interesting to look at, give it a look. But, like, I don't think you need to, like, rush out and see it. Like, it's not going to be like, oh, you didn't see this, what are we going to talk about, you know?
I agree. I think at one point I was like, there was a time when it was a 4, then it dropped down to a 3. Then I was like, probably one of my 2.99s. Then I kept watching and I was like, I'm sorry, this is a 2.5 movie. And unfortunately, it's just, it's all over the place. You're right. The cinematography is there, but there's nothing in there that you have to see in a theater. This could have been gone straight to streaming. Probably would have been done better. Would have been more of part of the conversation. I do not think it is going to be now. I think it's going to, the first wave of people are going to see it and tell everyone else not to see it. I think there was a time when I thought maybe churches would grab onto this. And I still think there will be some churches that grab onto this because it is a journey of faith and Jesus is not like disparaged much in it. So I think it might go that. But other than that, I don't see where this has life in the theater.
Yeah, and like with churches, like my dad was once talking to me like about the biblical themes he saw in Game of Thrones. So you really can turn anything into Bible study. So
my mom does it with The Matrix. So she's done it with Lord of the Rings as well. So it's in there. Like you get a churchy person in there, they're going to tell you the parable.
Exactly. So have some fun with the older kids at church lock-in.
You keep talking about lock-in.
Listen, there was nothing like a church lock-in. There was nothing like it. All that pizza. Mm-hmm.
All that $5 Domino's pizza.
You can't not beat it. You can't.
And with that, Leaving the Theater is a production of OhitsBigRon Studios. Alexandra Ketch of Bias Studios mixes the show. Thank you, Alex. Show art from Heather Wilder. Theme music by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. For more information about the Book of Clarence or Jonquilyn Hill, check out our show notes. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or Threads at OhitsBigRon. That's at OhitsBigRon. You can find out more about this show and other OhitsBigRon Studios shows by following us on Instagram at OhitsBigRon Studios and on Twitter at OhitsBigRon Stew. That's STEW. Leaving the Theater will be back soon. Thanks for listening. And thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right.